The third thing that my mom said, our greatest weapon is our dress. The third thing he said was our greatest war is time. Over the course of time, they will claim that if you speak out against Islam, if you speak out against and by the way, they're not radicals. I appreciate you using that term, and I understand why politically we need to. They're not radicals, they're devout. Surah, if you want the citation, hadith, where they say jihad never appears in the Quran, just write this down. Book 52 of the hadith is entitled, and I quote, Jihad, fighting for Allah's cause. Book 52 of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution in Islam, is entitled Jihad, Fighting for Allah's Cause. You want to find the protocols of jihad, they are right there. Just please cite it and smile. Because when they give this defense, this apologia, it's usually filled with things that are not true all the time. And then they scream if you speak out. They say, oh, this is Islamophobia. Much like the gays. Oh, well, you are homophobic. They come and chain themselves to trees at Liberty University. They scream, you are homophobic. You are homophobic. You are Islamophobic. You know what the deal is? I'm not Islamophobic. I'm not homophobic. I'm homo-nauseous. I am sick of hearing about your sexual choice. If anything, I'm theophobic, and because I'm scared of God, what you do has to be known as wrong. If the God who created you doesn't want you to do that, I'm not supposed to say you're allowed to do that. Now, what they do is they think they have time, that eventually they will seep into culture. That's where you and I come in, as the irritant, as Socratic gadflies, as the salt that sometimes irritates culture. I don't mind people not liking me. Our culture now is given over to, we are so terrified. Everybody wants to be famous. Reality television runs everything. The problem is, in our culture, that they forget. The one thing they don't want is anonymity. What they want is popularity. The problem is they forget that there's one other option. Notoriety is not necessarily popularity. Notoriety is they point at you and know who you are. Popularity, they like you. You will never be loved by culture. You're a believer in Jesus. But we cannot be anonymous. We cannot be mocked into muteness or scorned into silence. They may think they have time on their side. But I think that our culture will rise up, because I believe the body of Christ will. The final thing they said, if the greatest weakness is guilt, the greatest weapon is their dress, the greatest war they have is time, the greatest weapon of their war is time, then I would simply submit to you that they believe the greatest wickedness in our culture is our love of Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, I was raised believing the blood liable. I was taught that the Jews drank the blood of Palestinian children. I was raised believing that they were the pig people. I got saved, and you know what I discovered? One of our celebrations in Islam is called Eid Fatir, Eid Adha. It is the commemoration of Abraham. This is what the Quran teaches. Abraham goes to the top of Mount Moriah. He lays his son down on the altar. He raises up the knife to sacrifice his child to Allah. He plunges the knife down, and at the last minute, Allah provides a ram in the thicket and saves the life of Ishmael. Then I got saved. Started reading through the Bible, got to Genesis 21 and 22, and do you know what I discovered? I discovered that 2,200 years after Moses wrote it down, and 2,700 years after it took place, Muhammad flipped the script. He changed the story. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. It is the Abrahamic covenant. It is an irrevocable covenant. I now have the joy of standing with my brothers of Abraham. I now have the joy of standing with Israel. And you listen to me. Mess up my hair? Listen. You listen to me. God has never God has never abandoned a country that stood with Israel. And God has never blessed a nation that abandoned Israel. Jerusalem is God's indivisible and eternal city. If you want proof, when was the last time you took a vacation to Nineveh? Been to Babylon lately? 6-day war, Yom Kippur war, Lebanon war of 2000. I bring students to Israel every year and I say, stand here, because the next time he hits this ground and takes a throne right there. It is irrevocable. You can't fight it. Now, the Jews need Jesus just like you and I do. But the promise of the land was to them. Now, having told you what I was taught my entire life, a hatred for you, a hatred for Israel, a belief that Islam is going to overtake and overcome. My grandmama didn't get saved till she was 92. My grandmama had to read a Bible that we would magnify the pages. My grandmama didn't miss my sermons until she died in 1999. And when my grandmama, who barely knew any English, just enough to cuss, when my grandmama first started counseling me, I want to leave you two things that she said to me. And I'll be very honest with you. I'm trying to be as transparent as I can. Just because I think you deserve it. You guys are the fighters. Number one, I was embarrassed of being a Muslim. I was embarrassed that I'd been raised in Islam. In my first sermons I would preach, I didn't even reference it, never talked about it. Sometimes people would say, well, where did your name, Ergun Canor, come from? Where did this come from? And I'd go, I'm just Turkish, and then I'd move on. My grandmama said this to me, and I'm going to try to roughly translate it into our culture's language. Don't ever forget where you came from, but don't dwell where you've been. Don't ever forget where you came from. Your story is your story, and God will use it. Don't ever forget where you came from, but don't you ever dwell where you've been. Now, that wisdom is better than any weapon I have.